So my name is Darren Miller. So we're going to talk about common enterprise security policy. So this is something that we've talked about a lot at Cisco, but really we're responding to it because like the world exploded in 2020. The way customers are asking us to solve problems has fundamentally changed. And one, we talk to customers, Alex and myself, we commonly hear, I need to do tool consolidation. I need to make things easier, lower OpEx, all of the normal concerns, but we're seeing it in actual customer spend. So we're trying to, address that hybrid work use case, but at the same time that's happening, we have sustainability initiatives like smart buildings, things like that, and IoT and OT is exploding. So we have to have a really balanced approach to network security in particular. There is lots of things you can do at the application layer with ZTNA. We just announced, Cisco Secure Access, and this will complement that. It's not integrated as of yet, but it will be. So this is the problem that our customers are articulating to us. I am finding more and more dispersion of apps, users, things everywhere, and it's becoming a huge mesh of connectivity, and that creates a huge mess for network security. So what we're trying to do is get this mess to go from what customers express to us as a flat network. They literally will have anything talking to anything, and they need to move that into a controlled environment, right? This is not a new concept, but because of industry kind of marketing with zero trust, a lot of our customers are saying, I want to move my open network, my flat network, to a default deny. Like literally, you cannot pass a packet on a managed network unless it has a specific policy allowing it. So that's for any number of reasons, ransomware, jump host attacks, whatever they are. People have enough reason that they're really trying to push for this. So when we hear this and we want to accomplish this, we typically work through use cases, right? So app to app, user to app, or OT to app, users going to the internet. And we want to have common policies and different paths for all of that, right? It's this big mesh. And the great thing is when we show up to the market, we show up as individual islands of policy. And you guys love that, right? Anybody?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe. So this is what we want to get to, right? Is that we have at least building blocks that in those different paths can be reused so that we don't have, all of the work. So what does it mean when we want to bridge islands? The core of what we want to do is context sharing. And a context is trying to take objects out of all those different islands, whether they be a classification of a workload, a classification of an OT device, user, whatever it might be, and the policy function, right? The permit, the deny, the ports and protocols, whatever that might be, and share them amongst the different components so that they can have a common expression of an object. So what's that sort of look like? And we have lots of research in OpEx done by analysts as well as consulting firms that prove out if you can do that context sharing, you can lower OpEx, very, very greatly. The numbers vary depending upon methodology, but it's anywhere between 50 and 100%. So it's really significant if you can do it. So what we're starting out with is context sharing amongst the Cisco networking environment. And Alex is going to show you the Meraki function, but ACI, DNA Center. And we're going to share that over to all the different security products. In security, we can't just do it with Cisco. We have to have an open ecosystem. So direct competitors, all of the leading NG firewalls, secure internet gateway vendors, SASE vendors, third-party SD-WAN, we have those interoperability and we have to be able to share. Now, the way we're going to be doing this is the common object that we're going to be using within Cisco networking and sharing into third-party products as well as Cisco products is going to be normalized on what we call the security group tag. You've probably heard of that before, but that's the one thing that is uniform across basically the industry. Other switching vendors have announced, some have called it explicitly security group tags, others call it coloring, whatever it might be. It's a 16-bit number you stick in a header of a packet or you send over a control plane. So we're going to be doing that. Then we have the group membership. Like you belong to a group, you got to build a policy somehow. and we're going to be doing the contracts, which are the ACLs, if you will. We're going to be sharing that. And the way we go about it and what we're building towards as an ecosystem across building policy, right? Because every time I talk to a customer about doing this, right, the technology is going to work great, but they always start with, I have no idea what's on my network from a security perspective. I'm going from this open network. I have no idea what the network profile or the security profile is of communication, so I have to discover it. So I have to view it and model it. Once I do that, then I move into an establishing policy, right? Okay, I know it's on ports 1, 2, 3, push that out into the infrastructure. And sometimes they say, I want to push it out of the infrastructure, but I need some safeguard. So we have this notion of a monitoring function where you push it out, you generate telemetry, logs, whatever, make sure it's not, breaking anything, then turn on the enforcement. And then we have to be able to verify it. So give you some examples of what we've built. And we're going into this with the knowledge that there are different consumers of the technology. So let me give you an example of what I mean. Here's an example of a persona where it's a network operator. And some of my customers, the network operations team is responsible for enforcing policy. So this is a tool called Group-Based Policy Analytics built on top of DNAC. So DNAC is a NetOps tool. Network operations and network designers have that budget, and they still need to build this. This is an illustrative example where if we observe flows, FTP in this scenario, and they're missing from a contractor, an ACL, we can easily just hit a button, move that in, and then push that out into the network via API and ICE. But in addition to that, we also have secure network analytics, because that's a NetSecOps term, or what we call NetSecOps is like the firewall operators, the network-centric operators will have budget and they want to build this policy. So this is an example of secure network analytics where the green represents traffic actually flowing between groups. Gray means there's nothing happening. You can export this to a CSV and then import it into ICE via script to automatically create that policy. We're working towards making that a function that's automatically pushed out of the UI in secure network analytics. But you'll see this repeated in the enforcement of policy as well as in the monitoring of policy, that there are different personas for this, and even across domains, we'll have to have the ability to have ways to do this. So secure network analytics, as an example, is a hugely scalable flow engine that can handle data centers, IaaS, as well as on-prem networks very easily. Even Meraki, yeah. Yeah. Does it do anything special with Meraki?
In what way?
Okay, so the answer is no. It's
the same.
It's the same. Okay. But you look like you wanted to participate. So
I just wanted to
okay.
give you a hard time.
So in establishing policy, this is something that with the rise of overlays that we always have to clarify for people, right? So a lot of people think that this movement from a open network to a segmented network is, VRFs, layer 3 VPNs, or virtual networks with overlays and SD-WAN, call them VPNs. But it's basically traffic engineering to separate groups, right? In this scenario, it's building automation and campus users, and there's an implicit deny. I recently did some questions in different sessions with hundreds of people, and I asked, how many people use VRFs? A lot of people raised their hand. I asked then, how many of those people have them totally isolated? And only a few people raised their hand on that. And the one that is always isolated is a guest overlay, right? That's it. Everything else connects to something. And one of the things I tell the networking teams is with security, connectivity is assumed, right? Policy is not necessarily assumed, but connectivity, like the ability to get to the workload, the ability to get to the device is assumed. But we do use this for traffic engineering so that we get you to the correct place in the network to enforce policy, right? Sometimes people might have a medical environment or legacy devices that have to be protected by an IPS, like a threat, because Windows 7 is highly leveraged in a lot of manufacturing medical environments and the support. How do you protect those things? You build out network signatures against 0 day, or not 0 days, but against attacks on those. So we have very useful functions for macro segmentation. And then the micro segmentation is that, ability to classify, not just on user identity, even though a lot of user identity is moving into zero trust network access overlays. And it makes the policies you need to implement inside of the macro segment easier to visualize, easier to instantiate. You're not trying to replicate some robust application access control. But we use group-based policy or SGTs to do that, and we do it across all of those different domains that I talked about. And we've normalized it so that we're going to be building the policy in one spot in the identity services engine. We're sharing that out to SD-WAN, out to SDA, and they're enforcing that common policy. And one of the things we're going to show you in the demo and a little bit later in slides, we're pushing that policy into Meraki as well. So we have a lot of cloud curious customers, right? They're saying, I need to lower OpEx. I started the session saying, they're saying, we need tool reduction, we need easier consumption, we need lower OpEx. So medical environments, a lot of clinics are getting managed by Meraki because it's very simple. It's always on per se, in the sense that you can, run it from the cloud, and so you don't lock yourself out of it. So you avoid truck rolls, things like that. We have integration there. So the core of the policy is built on SGTs, and what we're trying to get away from is topology dependence, right? You probably have heard either me or some of my colleagues talk about in VNs and in VLAN stitching and all of these things, right? You always have this dependence on changing something in the network in order to get traffic engineering to the right spot. But what we really want to be able to do is have independence of the policy away from the network topology. This is especially important as people are moving to zero trust. One of the principles we espouse in zero trust is continuous evaluation and then a response when changes in trust occur. In order to do that for either a non-compliant or something that's moving or having the trust change from trusted user on a trusted device to investigate because of an incident response playbook, we want to be able to trigger that and have that overlay on the network rather than having to move them from virtual network 1 to virtual network 2. And we need to scale it. So one of the benefits of the inline tagging methodology is that if I can actually tag up to that firewall doesn't have to actually know anything in memory about the user. They just receive the tag on the frame. It can scale infinitely, IPv4, IPv6, and the only thing that firewall has to do is understand the data center workloads. So highly scalable, and it's a centralized policy across all the different domains. So you've probably seen this before. We're grouping users together. Once we have those, we're going to greatly simplify how we can express the connectivity between the groups, but we also want to do that with the destinations. Now, these destinations in on-premise is simple, but when we start going out into the internet as a service, or have objects that get changed routinely, like Office 365 every week, new IP addresses get published, we have to have a way to update these objects as well. And that's part of the integration that we're doing above and beyond, like integrating with ACI. We're actually integrating with IaaS as well as private cloud providers. And then we can start building these different policies. In addition, we're working with not only our SIG, but also third-party SIGs, secure internet gateways, so that if you have URL filtering, if you have threat analytics that you need to run against the traffic going to the cloud because of your particular policies, we can supply this same information to those enforcement points. So it's not just an on-prem relevance for the group-based policy, it also has cloud relevance, which is something that's net new. So if we're doing this correctly, we should be able to build out a huge mesh. And we've done this. This is something that we've worked on and we've successfully deployed at a number of different large global enterprises. We're really focused on being able to integrate all of the different domains with a policy, with a common classification, so that no matter where the application sits or where it sits globally, like not just the data center, but there's manufacturing apps that move out into the branch, if you will, from a traditional SD-WAN perspective, or even internet only branches, and we'll be able to apply the policy consistently across all of those different things. And we integrate with all of the controllers that we have at Cisco. So ACI. Question?
I mean, the first thing you said is very true for most organizations. They don't know what's on their network. They don't know what people need. And it's a nightmare getting to actually be that
Right.
effective.
To actually do this.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so I'm curious on your kind of what you have in place to help organizations get to the point where they can do this. Like maybe there's some sort of auditing that you can say, this is why this isn't working, or
Yeah, I'm gonna show that. Great questions, because there's an aspect that I wanted to bring out in that when we go into the audit function, right? And that aspect is often when I'm talking about this, and I do a lot of consulting work with a lot of organizations, they always want it to be a technology answer, and just a technology answer. Tell me with a budget, and if we're doing this right, this isn't a technology answer. This is a business process answer. Like, if you're going to commit to zero trust and you're actually going to go from this open network to this default deny, which some of our customers are, like literally one medical environment, we built CMD integration because they could get the information about an asset into CMDB before it even showed up at the premise. And then the identity services engine would sync that information. And as soon as it would show up, they could authorize it onto the network. Everything works. But if something shows up and it doesn't get on the network, hasn't been registered, it doesn't get access. So hospitals, doctors are, the number one asset, and doctors get really upset if their pet thing doesn't get access to the network. So you literally had to have the business tell the doctors, this is the way you're going to work now. That's a huge shift mentally for users. And it's a huge shift mentally for the operators. But like, if we're really trying to do this, and this is an example I can give you, is there's two companies, they make the exact same product, and the way company one approaches this versus company two is very different. One is very permissive and wondering why they're having troubles controlling certain aspects of their security policy, and the other is very regimented, very driven. They did a lot of work at the beginning to do the business process engineering. So beyond technology, we have a lot of consulting work in Cisco, but also with partners that have done this before and done it successfully. And so I really think that is a big aspect. Always have an executive sponsor. Like, this isn't like a technology thing. It's really boring because we're technologists, but it's super important. Always having a technology or an executive sponsor that can advocate for change is critical to success. I have a whole slide deck on that.
So would you say deploying this kind of a solution, you'd also have to need like professional services to change it, or it's I could do it in my environment if I had the proper sponsorship, the proper.
Yeah, you don't have to have professional service. I have a manufacturer, and they've done everything themselves. There's no professional services involved, but they have executive sponsorship. They have really good talent to do it. Often, lean IT or companies that haven't focused on this don't feel like they're comfortable. They don't feel like they have them. So we have, if you need augmented, talent, here's professional services. It's not something that you have to do. We're building these tools so you don't have to do that. But a lot of people, the confidence level that they know how to build out those profiles, not whether the tech works, it's like their competence at building it, they ask for assistance.
So really, we have executive sponsorship is not directly related to this. That's for any major changes. You should do that.
Yeah, fair point. Fair point. But it's what's funny about that, right, is two things that people have assumptions about is they don't think they need it for segmentation. And then the second thing is they always want to know what's the final number, right? Like, how long is it going to take?
How do I write a check?
And I want to write a check and be done. And it's like, well, we're fundamentally changing the way your network works if you really want to do this. Now, some people just don't want to do it at all, and that's like fine. We have other ways to do security, but some people must do this for regulatory compliance or whatever it might be. And so when we get into these discussions, like, one of the things that I talk extensively about is it's not just a technology problem. I can make the technology work, and I have the easy job, right? Getting that policy defined and getting the business to buy in to change, to your point, you have to do that on any big change.
It's not just a business, it's also parts of IT.
Yeah.
Like developers, for instance, they do not want to talk about, what ports do you need?
Yeah. Great point. Yep. And I would say that's the there's science and art to this. That's art, is how do you build that layer 8 or whatever you want to call the conversations amongst those different service owners or application owners. And really, this is security, right? This is why some people love security, and this is why some people hate it.
But yeah, it's moving from the old style thinking of, you have this castle of an environment. You put a firewall in front and you're totally secure. You're moving that back all the way down to the laptop.
The old crunchy on the outside, soft in the middle. Now we want to make it a jawbreaker with layers and all that wonderful. It's
onion.
It's
At the same time, there's never an end state. Like zero
Yeah,
trust.
that's it.
Yeah, it's never an end state. It is a constant goal that you never achieve. It's
where
it's the greyhound chasing the rabbit.
You need to get other parts of IT, like developers, for instance, thinking about that understanding when they're
like software development.
It's like software development. Well, one misconception is like it will always be as expensive as when they first start. So they're always like, how many FTEs do I need? And we'll say, okay, you're going to see this spike of people that you need. And then there's this long tail where it goes down to almost nothing. Because once you get the process set, you actually don't even think about it anymore. It's like any other service. Like we blame DNS for the outage that just occurred, but like not a lot of people think about DNS other than making sure it's up and monitoring it. Like they know how to add an A record. They know how to do a quad A. It just sort of happens. That's what can happen when you do this correctly. But it does take time. And to the point made, it's never ending. And that's a big misconception at the executive level, I would call it. So moving on, 2 ways that people sort of engage this. One is stateless. Some people will, do access control out in the campus for lateral movement, but some people also use this, and I illustrated the router, not because of a data center, but because it becomes a simple place for infrastructure as a service workloads to be protected. They don't want to deal with symmetrical routing. Anybody ever had to redesign their network because of firewalls and having all that fun with asymmetrical routing and symmetrical routing? So a lot of people are like, I don't want to do that. I want a stateless ACL. I want improved security, but I want a stateless ACL because it's just simpler to implement, right? So we have that capability. At the same time, we have stateful capabilities, and this is for the scenarios where the people doing risk assessment are saying, hey, I need more policy. I need, IPS or anti-malware, whatever it is, on top of the basic policy. So we often have stateless ACLs handling lateral movement. We sort of put people on a path where they can't communicate laterally, but they can communicate up to the workloads. Now, what I'm pointing out here is not only pick the right tool for the job, but that there are some scenarios where the management moves out of ICE, and that's into the firewall manager. And so the firewall manager might have a separate policy. One of the things that we do not have now, but we're working towards, is a way to visualize that in one spot. Not manage it. You want to start a fight, you ask the person administering ICE to start managing the firewall policies, or vice versa, and like the knives come out because it's territory, more than anything. It's like, no, that's my job. I'm doing that. So, but we have been asked, and we are going to commit to having visualization of that. The other thing that we're doing, and Alex is going to show you, is moving an on-prem component to a cloud component. So we have what we call adaptive policy in the Meraki stack, the wireless APs, the switches, and now the SD-WAN router all carry the tag. So you can build a mesh of SD-WAN routers and have enforcement between all of the different branches. But they have their own policy definition in Meraki because of a number of different good decisions for cloud management, for availability and business continuance. They need to have that policy control down into their stack. But now we got a Cat9K in the middle of it. So ICE pushes that policy. So now we've got this disparate policy. That's not what we want to do. So we have the ability to sync that policy up from ICE into Meraki dashboard, and it'll show you that, and be able to make sure that the policies are consistent across this. And this is actually a topology that we're deploying at a number of different companies that are that cloud curious. They build out the access layer with Meraki, and then they might still have a core with a traditional Catalyst. So when we view or when we verify policy, and I hope to get back to your question or the point you made earlier, we again have this difference in NetOps and SecOps. Inside of NetOps, they're really, when they implement these policies, they just want to know that it's working. They want to know that it's not overloading the TCAM in a switch or overloading an access point. So we have visibility here of permits and denies. We can tell you, oh yeah, it's working. One of the things that happens when you do this is there's background noise. Windows devices send out tons of broadcasts. It'll hit policy and it'll get dropped. So some of this will increment all the time, but it's not indicating that there's any problem. It's just this background noise. So we're working with some of our machine learning team to be able to differentiate background noise from actual either bad behavior, but typically when you see is just a device that's misbehaving, not because of malicious intent, just because some piece of software is malfunctioning. So we need to be able to separate that, especially for normal network operations. Inside of Secure Network Analytics, SNA, this is one of the most powerful things that network security teams, they love this. This is Secure Network Analytics, you guys heard yesterday from Matt Robertson. He's a friend of mine, and he helped me build this tool, or he built this tool, I should say, with his team. And what they do is they're actually monitoring. Green means there's a policy, things are flowing. Red means there's a policy, things are dropping. But these exclamation points mean, hey, the blue means there's an ACL in there. But the exclamation point says, I am seeing flows that should not be happening per policy. So it's actually a drift or an escape flow is what some people call it, but it shows drift in a policy. So as you're implementing it, how do you know it's working? And is it working correctly? So this is telling us that we see flows that should not be happening. So what is that? So you can drill down from this into where we saw the flow and then investigate whether those devices have the proper policy from ICE. So an example that we found in actual deployments was somebody went in, they said, oh, I know what the problem is. The last thing to change was SGTs. So I'll turn it off. Then they got done with whatever it is. Oh, it wasn't SGTs. What did they do? They didn't turn it back on, right? Change control, right? And so we had flows happening that should not have been happening. Now, luckily in that scenario, nothing malicious was going on, but this is the kind of monitoring that we have available and we're going to continue to build towards. Now, I can't remember your exact question, so could you repeat it? I'm sorry.
It was more around, I mean, that kind of covers a bit, but
Okay.
it was more around organizations starting the process to get here.
Right.
Because this sounds like, well, it's mostly in place, we just have to troubleshoot a few things, but where do I bloody start? Like,
yeah, so way back at that first SNA screen that I showed you, or that group-based policy and analytics, that's the step in that view policy, model policy step. That's where we suggest people start. Like, hey, get awareness of what's actually happening. Define some security groups, and I often say start small and then build towards complexity. Because the reason I say that, people are like, oh, you're saying that because the tech doesn't work. It's like, no, it's like an operational function. Like, you have to be able to articulate what the policy is. So start with something small that you can wrap your hands around, figure out how to go through the process of creating that policy and then deploying it, and then add in more. And so
almost like having like a monitoring in place instead of actually blocking or actually
Right.
preventing. It's
Yep.
monitoring, seeing what's
the
happening.
tech doesn't work, it's that the tech does work, and if you do it wrong, you will need to go get a resume done.
Yep. There is
CVA.
something called the career limiting firewall rule. And this can be the same thing.
Oh,
There's
this
career
can
limited.
do it on great scale.
Yeah, great scale. Yes.
One day I'll-
If you would like to have a denial of service on demand, you can do it. And the tech will be doing exactly what you told it to.
Disaster simulation. I could pull a disaster recovery simulation because
Yes, you could.
all goes to hell.
And there's something inside of the identity service engine called DEFCON. Like, people literally build out plans for either incident response, but some of them do it for disaster recovery reasons. They want to simulate what happens, and they'll knock off part of their network with this.
It's
and then they roll it back, right? It's much easier than, you know, having somebody go out and pull a wire or something like that. So in summary, we're building policy across all of our components. We are centralizing that function. We're working towards zero trust. This is inclusive of not just Cisco networking products, but also the security products and other third parties. And you had something you wanted to say?
Oh, yeah. So from a Meraki perspective, we would usually start with something like, especially with a large environment, using something like secure network analytics and flow exports, just for it's really well done and it's very granular. Like dashboard does give us like device connectivity and like the types of devices, but when it comes to like building granular policies, we'd go that route. As Darren was mentioning, we're working on trying to make sure that policy can be, you know, more or less stayed in sync across a lot of different areas. And so like we already have TrustSec within ICE where you can build this out and sync policy across like, you know, Catalyst devices. And when we built out the sync function with dashboard, one of the things we wanted to do was make sure that it can leverage that same backend so that as a security administrator, you don't have to get into dashboard and go, okay, so I built this policy here. And I'm going to go in here, I'm going to build this same policy here. And so we were like, okay, well, what if we use the open APIs we built for policy and then have ICE actually push that policy? And so what I'm showing here is a newer section. So I think we launched this in January.
Yes.
And I've already got this set up, but so I'm not going to go through and drop an API key in there and make you all stare at a screen while it's like doing things. But the nice thing is that it is very honestly easy to get set up. And so like when you build out this connection tab here, you can add a dashboard organization. And since adaptive policy is an org level policy set, we don't have this concept of like network by network policies that you have to continue to like update over time. And so you can add, I think it's up to 20 organizations. So for large customers or customers that are geographically dispersed, they don't have to you know, go in and find ways to build more ICE clusters and sync policy. We have just, you can put your API key in, and as long as that API key has access to, you know, the various organizations you have, we're able to sync policy, and you can sync it in intervals of down to 5 minutes. So when you make a policy update, it usually is pretty quick. And not only that, but from a dashboard perspective, we then sync it as a config update. And that config update usually takes about sometimes less than like 10 seconds, sometimes maybe a minute or two, depending on how busy the device is. And so when we go in to actually sync policy over, all we have to do is, especially if you have a pre-existing environment, we can sync you know, specific aspects like egress policies, but you can start with like the SGTs themselves. I actually demoed this recently, so you can see I added a new SGT, and it was on the 5th of June this year. That's the way I find new values to add when I'm doing this. But the one thing that is nice about this is that you can add it here, build your policy, and then hit the go button. And if you have everything deployed in dashboard, it will just update policy as you'd expect, and also update policy in the other environments that you have. I don't know if like we can speak to like exactly what we're going to keep adding to for policy syncing, but
there's the thing that we can talk about is there's static definitions of IPs to SGTs that commonly occur like this part of the data center. We're going to be adding that to be synced into the dashboard. We're also going to be using objects that we learned from cloud services. Those will get normalized into SGTs, and then they'll dynamically be added to dashboard. So if you do an evaluation of a Amazon security group or any attributes on a workload in Amazon, and you then decide that's SGT foo, that will flow directly into Meraki without any user intervention.
Awesome, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. And so once we have policy synced, we can get that actually into dashboard, and it will become active usually within a few minutes, as I was mentioning. There's one thing I wanted to call out. Let me see if I have the right network here. Is for the last couple of years, as I've talked about adaptive policy, it's just been very network centric because we haven't had a way of sharing context over, well, anything. It's just within the network. And once it gets to that edge, it was kind of dead. And so we recently in MX, which is our SD-WAN appliance, 18.1 added in the ability for us to carry it over auto VPN, which if you're familiar with auto VPN it could be the easiest VPN I've ever stood up, because I've built many, many different firewall appliance, site-to-site VPNs, mesh VPNs. They all have their challenges. And with the way that we do things, especially within Meraki, is it's usually, hopefully, fairly straightforward. And so you can turn on the actual VPN function, and then enabling an actual, the ability to carry SGTs over VPN is as simple as like literally clicking enable. And I literally, that's it. So I've had a few folks say like, okay, so where's the rest of it? Like, there's obviously other things I have to do, right? There's one other piece, and that is, since the MX does have, ports that attach to other devices, we can't necessarily propagate SGTs to everything without breaking things. And so turning it on is as simple as then going to the interface and then clicking enable, and then we'll propagate SGTs down to the network appliances beneath there. And it takes like literally a minute to set this up and enable this function. One of the really cool things is that we are going to have environments where customers haven't turned up adaptive policy on a site. Maybe they haven't, cut over to newer appliances or newer hardware. And so when you set that VPN configuration, it will tell the rest of the appliances in the area, like, hey, like you can either send me encapsulated traffic or not. So we're not going to break existing VPN deployments, but enable people to selectively and slowly over time, like migrate into a policy where they're able to have something that can allow us to perform the same policy at the site across the entire organization. The one last piece that I was going to add to this is we are working towards, and I think within the next few months, we're going to have the next iteration of MX software. We will start classifying and allowing for like teleworker appliances to start actually tagging client traffic and carrying it into the, in the rest of the organization, which is oddly important because it becomes really painful when you have to build an ACL on 50,000 teleworker appliances and manage that consistently while then also managing a completely separate, disparate policy environment. And so this is going to bring us into the point where, as Darren was mentioning, with like hybrid work, I don't like that term per se, but it does describe a scenario where like I work from home and I'd be able to have an appliance get the same policy experience and the same control for the IT organization, whether I'm there or on site. Anyway, I think probably sums up my demo.
Okay. Well, with that in mind, I say thank you. And are there any questions?
One quick question on in secure network analytics, when you're looking at the rogue flows, and you mentioned, SGTs have been turned off. How does SNA know about the flows if SGTs are turned off?
Okay, so they know about the flow because they actually see the flow data coming into it.
Just through a normal
normal
net flow or
normal net flow.
Okay.
There is going to be some enhancements where we're going to be in approximately August, September. We're going to be stating it in the switches. The switches will actually say flow created, flow denied. And so they'll be able to interpret that using a firewall event that they already support. And basically, when they see that definite statement of denied or created, they're going to integrate that into the report.
Okay. Thank you.
And so this is actually what it looks like in a real environment. And the one cool part about this is that, as Darren was mentioning, like when we have a policy built and we start seeing traffic that's permitted, it can help you try to identify where in the path the issue is and then be able to go in and fix it. I think that's the most fun part. It's kind of like with Dashboard when I ask people how they do, like, how do you find where clients connected in your network today? I used to be in sales, so this is a fun question to ask people. And they're like, oh yeah, it's great. So I talk to them and I ask them, look, what's your MAC address? I'm like, how do you ask someone that doesn't know what a MAC address is, what their MAC address is? And they're like, oh, so then we had to write this scripting tool and you click a button on the desktop and then it pops a window up and then you tell them where to look to find the MAC. And then I go into my network and I start somewhere and I start just typing and trying to find the MAC address here. And then I look and it's on this link and then I go to that device and I go show CDP neighbor. Okay, log into this one. And this is the most fun part was then going into Dashboard, typing like part of the MAC address and then boop, it's there on that port. And so it's kind of the same idea when you look at trying to determine why traffic isn't passing or why traffic is passing. Did you have something?
Nope,
Oh,
I disagree.
Yeah, but the nice part here is like this is a Meraki environment, and I've been sending lots and lots of flow telemetry to this appliance here, and so we can see like this quarantine, group where they have a lot of communication with a lot of different things. Who's logged in? I'm trying to remember this one.
I wonder.
Yeah, long story short, the nice thing is that we can get in and like start investigating specific clients as well. And I actually have a session that I presented a couple times with Matt on performing what's called adaptive network control, so that we can actually start automating policy response. And so it's not just like a guy going in and changing, or a girl going in and changing, or whoever going in and changing something. It's oh, am I over?
No.
I was going to say, because I thought, oh, nice.
It's kind
I've
of,
gained
that's why it's red.
but then the nice piece there is that you don't have to wake up at 2 a.m. to fix a problem if you've built a response mechanism to actually isolate it, at least. Or if you do wake up, at least you don't have to do a lot of work while you're trying
You
to.
hit a button.